So there are a ton of cursed tools in JJK, but how are they made? Let's talk about it. First of all, like a lot of things in JJK, this is never explicitly spelled out for us. So we don't know exactly how things like the inverted spear of heaven are made, but we can make some pretty good guesses by reading between the lines. So let's look at what the series does tell us about these cursed tools. So let's start with Slaughter Demon, this dagger that Gojo gives Yuji, because if you recall, at this point in the story, Yuji still couldn't really wield his own cursed energy yet, so he needed a way to be able to attack cursed spirits. So what does that tell us? It tells us that this dagger alone can harm cursed spirits even in the hands of a non-sorcerer at this point, right? So that dagger is imbued with cursed energy. That's the only way that it would be able to be an effective weapon, right? So this gives us some clue that cursed tools are weapons that have literally been imbued with cursed energy. Now, I know that's very obvious, but we're just doing the building blocks here to, see what we can figure out about these things. So you've got something like Slaughter Demon, which is a cursed tool. It's been imbued with cursed energy, but at the end of the day, it's still fairly simple. It just does what a normal dagger does, right? Point and stab. But then we've got cursed tools that are more complicated, like this sword that has the hand on the end that Haruta ends up using. That was actually created by this man, Juzo. This is the same guy that wanted to turn Gojo into a coat rack during the sister school event, if you'll recall. So he can clearly make something more complicated than something like the Slaughter Demon. He's also responsible for another cursed tool that will show up later in the series, but we're not going to get into spoilers for this video. So if we know that the Slaughter Demon is just imbued with cursed energy, then we can assume that however much that is, however much time that took, that's how you make a simple cursed tool. Then how do you make something more complicated like this guy makes? I think there's some level of expertise involved, right? Something beyond just the simple output of cursed energy into a tool. Now, whatever you want to call that, you could make it akin to like a master blacksmith or something like that, but there is clearly skill that can be involved in this as well, which will produce higher quality items, if you will. And let's take that even a step further by looking at Miguel's Black Rope, a cursed tool that has an ability that is arguably one of the most powerful in the entire series, given that it's one of like 4 things that is able to nullify Gojo's Limitless. And the only thing we're really told about this is Miguel tells us that his ancestors spent decades and decades crafting this thing. So right there, that just tells us that not only there was expertise over decades, but over decades means there was also a bunch of time invested. So essentially for cursed tools so far, we just know that there's got to be a lot of cursed energy involved over a long period of time. And the more knowledgeable you are in this realm, the more capable of a cursed tool you're able to create. But we can still go a step further. And that brings us to something like the inverted spear of heaven, or cursed tools that literally have cursed techniques imbued into them. So how is that possible? Well, I think it's a product of everything we've already talked about, plus actually using a tool to channel your curse technique. So imagine a sorcerer using the same weapon for their entire life to channel cursed energy into, but also to literally use it to channel their curse technique into. Now, we don't know how this was made, but my best guess is that it was wielded by somebody who had a nullification technique, and over time, it eventually took on that technique itself. And to cite back to Juzo here, we know he wanted to turn Gojo into a coat rack. So perhaps even if you are not literally the wielder of that curse technique, but you have access to their remains, if you will, maybe it's possible to do something along those lines as well. For my money, and this is completely just me pulling it out of nowhere, my opinion, I would imagine if you can do it that way, it's not going to be as powerful as the wielder of the curse technique themselves creating a cursed tool, but pure speculation. And then for my final point here, I do need to give a slight spoiler warning. It's from something that's going on in the manga currently, but I'm not going to give any like context around it. It's just an information point. But if you're the type of person that doesn't want to know any type of those reveals, then you can head out here. And don't worry, you have all the information basically. This is just an example. But anyways, wanted to give that warning. So the last thing I wanted to say is that Nanami's weapon is a cursed tool. This weapon is now imbued with his ratio curse technique. And we know that because we have seen Ino and Kusakabe wield it. So that kind of tells us that, it was probably created due to Nanami wielding it his entire life, channeling not only cursed energy, but his cursed technique through it, and ultimately it became a cursed tool, right? However, it's at least possible that that was not the only thing required, and maybe parts of his remains or something were also used to create it, but given how he went out, I doubt it. So I would imagine this was purely created through his use of it throughout his life, but we still don't know for sure. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Shout out to Haven for the sponsored question today. Thank you and everyone else for the support, and I will see y'all in the next one.